Okay, so today's lesson is all about aperture and depth of field. Aperture is something that's happening inside of our camera lens. So the part that we take off on a DSLR camera or a mirrorless camera, this is where aperture is happening, okay? Every lens has a different capacity for aperture depending on if it's a zoom lens or a fixed focal length. And aperture controls two things. One, obviously, since it's dealing with exposure, it controls how much light is allowed in your camera through a diaphragm. Two, it controls the depth of field, which is your point of focus. Basically, there's an angle of refraction of light, and where it's hitting the image sensor based on the opening is going to change where that point of focus is for your subject matter. So the example we have here on this slide is two clothespins on a line. One taken with a fixed focal length lens, 50 millimeters at f-stop 2, is getting a nice background blur. We would call this a shallow depth of field and a brighter photo. The other, taken at f16, getting more detail in the background. We can see the leaves, we can see the hood of the car and the windows, and we can see more of the dark values in the clothespin because that is a smaller opening. So the openings that we have in our depth of field or aperture are shown here on the slide. An f2.5 is a nice wide opening, so it's going to be a brighter picture with a shallower depth of field. And then a larger opening, or one of the largest openings, would be f22. The smallest openings would be f22, which would give us a larger depth of field. So the f-stop number is counterintuitive to what we would think it is. A bigger number equals a smaller opening, and a smaller number equals a wider opening. So this is one that students want to review a couple times before they go out and take their picture. Here we have another slide that goes over the two differences. The picture on the left with the leaf showing us time when we might want a shallow depth of field to really focus in on the texture and detail of that subject matter and get that nice soft bokeh background blur. And then the photo on the right of the gondolas and the boats and the river is an example when we would want a long range or a larger depth of field with a smaller opening because we want to see all the detail in this beautiful landscape shot. We want to see the crispness in those purple clouds and the windows on those buildings, and we want to see the detail in the foreground as well. So when we are changing our f-stop, if we're going for a smaller opening, then we have a larger f-stop number in our camera and a longer range of focus. When we have a smaller number, we have a larger opening in our lens and a shallower range of focus. Okay, so the way we're going to play with this today and discover its uses is we're going to set our camera's mode dial to AV. So we want that little ticker, that little white line, to line up with AV. Okay, some cameras it just says A, but most of our cameras at school say AV. Okay, when we're on AV, we'll see it in our screen that the f-stop number is going to get those orange tickers over them. And when we adjust our crank dial right here, we're going to change our f-stop number. Okay, so when I crank all the way to the right, I get as high as f29. When I crank all the way to the left, I get as low as f4.5. Now, depending on what lens you have on your camera and the lighting environment and how close you are to your subject matter, we can have a range of what our lowest f-stop number could be. So this is a zoom lens. So you'll see the numbers on the top here, 3.5 through to 5.6. So in a super bright environment with the right settings, this lens can get as low as f3.5. But in a darkened environment, it can only go to 5.6. So we're going to set up a scene for the capture of depth of field and demonstrating that range with our cameras where we have depth. So if I have my mug in my foreground and I have my glasses behind and I have a kettle behind that, and then I set myself up so that I am level with those three subjects. I want to also, on this point, because we haven't discovered it yet, set my ISO to auto. So I'm going to press the ISO button on my camera, and I'm going to go to auto and hit set, okay? That way, the only thing that we are changing in our camera is our f-stop, 4.5. So I'm going to get a nice depth of field photo, and I'm going to get long and have a foreground, middle ground, and background. I'm going to get myself eye level with my subject matter and take my shot at f4.5. My settings were, when I go back and hit playback and display, it's going to show me that it set my ISO to 320 and my shutter to 1/50. My photo is quite bright. The white of the kettle is barely visible. And if I zoom in, I don't have a ton of focus in my background. Okay, it's a little bit soft. Now, I'm going to demonstrate that again by going with my crank dial here and adjusting my f-stop now to be a higher number like 7.1. And I'm going to set myself up on the same range, get myself eye level with my subject, make sure that my image is focused, and take my shot. And this time, because I had a smaller opening in my camera said, okay, I'm going to need to change something to balance out this scene, and it set my ISO to 800, okay? And we can see a little bit more detail in my background of the kettle and my microwave as I get longer with my range of focus. So I'm going to do that again. I'm going to turn my crank dial with the top of my camera, and I'm going to go to f14. I'm going to take my photo again and focus in, make sure I'm eye level so I can see the difference in the background, shoot the picture, and this time it brought my ISO up to 1600 and my shutter speed to 120. So it slowed down my shutter speed to allow more time for light to pass in, and it brought my ISO up as high as 1600 to allow for more light sensitivity because f14 is a small opening. Okay, I'm going to try one more at f22, and there's a real chance that this photo is going to turn out blurry because f22 is a super small opening, and my camera is going to try and compensate by slowing down my shutter. So I'm going to try that again, get myself eye level with my subject, and find my focus, and shoot nice and still as I can. And I could hear it there. My shutter speed was quite a bit slower. So it was 1/6 of a second, okay? And when I zoom in, I can see a lot more details in my background, okay? So that's going to be our task for today. I want you to find a visually appealing scene with a foreground, middle ground, and background. Get yourself set eye level with those subjects, and then set your mode dial to AV. Take 1 or 2 at a low f-stop number, a wider opening, and 1 or 2 at a high f-stop number, a smaller opening, and look to see what the differences is in both the depth of field, how much of the shot is in focus, and your settings. What's your camera going to change your shutter speed to and your ISO to? If you want to be a superstar, try and balance out your ISO to see if you can get your shutter speed fast enough to not have motion blur. All right, thanks so much, and give yourself a shot with this. Find something exciting to shoot, and good luck.